Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Business Change Support material. Today we'll be talking about the impact assessment, what it is, how to do it and why it's useful to do. So what is an impact assessment? Well, fundamentally it allows you to evaluate how your organisation and stakeholders will be impacted by the move to Street Manager by clearly outlining the changes that need to happen in each business area. This will help you define the transition requirements and priority areas later on. The impact builds on from a gap analysis between the current and future state by asking, so what? And what does this gap mean for the project and all the impacted stakeholders? Most importantly, it gives us an understanding of the change in its totality, not only how it will impact individual people or processes, but also the links and dependencies between them. So let's take a look at it. So as I said earlier, it's important to remember that not all of the fields are necessary. Each organisation will have their own way of filling this out. It's up to you to decide how much information and detail you want to put in, but I would suggest that you have a look at the guidance and best practice page here, which will provide you with some ideas of some of the questions that you should be considering and when and how to do the change impact assessment, as well as tool navigation, which helps to explain and break down these things that we've covered today in a bit more detail. So as you can see, we've put in a few examples already, and it's important to remember that these are just examples, and each organisation will have different impacts to consider and different teams working, so you have to think about what works for you and your organisation. But the first area that you consider is what organisation element will be impacted. So is it people, processes, technology, etc.? And then which part of the organisation is being impacted. From there, you go on to work out the current state summary. So this might be how it currently works. So here you can see that we've got 5 people currently managing permits on the Eaton system. Then you have to work out the future state summary. So what will be happening in a Street Manager world? Well, the team will be trained to use Street Manager. So then what you have to do is work out the gap. So this is how is the future state different to the current state. So essentially there is a new service for managing permits that needs to be considered. From there, you can think about the level of impact overall. So to do that, you should break it down into the numbers of people impacted and what level of impact that will be, the number of processes impacted and the impact that that will have, and then the numbers of systems affected and the impact that that will have on technology. And that will give you an automated priority rating. As we can see from the first example around the Streetworks team and how they will be using the system, the impact is high on all 3 areas, and therefore it's auto-generating a very high impact priority rating. So let's work through an example together. And this example is going to be people and Streetworks team related. And it's essentially going to be about what might happen to the increased capacity that some of the operators have as a result of the collaborative tools within Streetworks. So the current process is very manual, so we need to cover that in the current state. The new process in Street Manager, however, is very collaborative. As such, users will have a new capacity which they can use, for example, for working on forward plans. So now we have to work out what is the gap between the two. Well, we're going to need an updating of roles and responsibilities to reflect these new ways of working. Then we have to think about the impact of this. So we think this is probably going to be a medium impact level, because whilst it will give up free time for people, it's not a fundamental change in the way people do things. We've put earlier that there are 5 people currently working in the Streetworks team, so 5 people will be impacted, and the impact on them will be high. The number of processes affected is just 1, and the impact on that will be medium. The number of systems affected There are no systems affected since it's just about the processes, so that will be low tech impact. And so if we drag this here, we can see that it auto-generates a priority rating of medium. So now that we've been able to complete some of these, let's take a look at the dashboard. So the dashboard will automatically update in line with the information that you put in the impact assessment tools, which is a really great thing because it means you can see in a really visual way and show others some of the information that you're putting into the tool. So what can we see from the dashboard itself? Well, first of all, we can start to see the priorities. So when we look at this dashboard, for example, we can see that there are quite a lot of people-focused primary and secondary priorities. And when we look at the very high priority breakdown, they're currently all people. And whilst there are some process and technology priority items, they're not as high impact. And therefore, based on this information, the organisation might want to start with focusing on their people. Obviously, we recognise that this is quite a small sample size because it is just a test and it just shows you a couple of examples. But once you fill out the entire assessment with all the impacts it could possibly do, it will give you a really good oversight of what the landscape looks like for you and your organisation. To recap, how you use the impact assessment will fundamentally depend on what information you have and what level of detail you want your analysis to show. The key is to consider the possible implications of all elements of your organisation. So the people, the IT, the processes, the organisation as a whole, the ways of working, the policies and procedures, as well as how a change in one of these elements might impact another. That will give you a better view of the real impact on your organisation and allow you to do some more planning. Finally, a good practice is to treat this tool as a live document and update it when and if you obtain more information or something happens that's likely to significantly change your circumstances. Thank you for listening, and we hope that this has been useful. Look out for our next video on the readiness assessment.